Can you remember the moment that you felt actually in love?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know if there was an exact. Oh, you know what? Actually, I can think.
Ah.
We were driving home from a date, and he put this is hopefully this doesn't embarrass my husband, but because he was such, we met in a boxing class, and he was just kind of a tough guy, and he's a big guy, and he's really strong, and he's from Colorado and very outdoorsy, and so he put on the Moulin Rouge soundtrack, and we were like singing along together, and I was so impressed that he had that side to him too. And I like didn't see that coming, and I just remember looking at him and being like, you're all the things that I'm looking for. He's like, he has this like sweet, funny, silly side to him too, along with all the other parts of him. So I remember really feeling in love in that moment.
Awesome. Okay, so this is perfect, because this is really the setup. So many times when we fall in love, we think that we're falling in love with the person in front of us. And so we associate that feeling of love with the person. And what I want to help uncover is that this is actually just an illusion. That this is actually more of a feeling that you're just calling yourself forward into. You're bringing yourself actually into the energy of love itself, but associating it with the person.
Interesting.
So just like when somebody does some action or says something and that triggers you into anger,
Yeah.
it's similar when you fall in love. When
Yeah.
what you think is happening here, it's that this person said or did something that triggered that feeling of love to sort of you sort of elevate yourself into that energy.
Yeah.
And what happens when we're in the energy of love is the very opposite of what happens when we're triggered and we go into the energy of fear. So these are where our opposites are. And when we're in fear or we're in fight or flight, we're looking for the bad. We are trying to protect ourselves.
Right.
We want to control situations. We want to control people. We want to control the pain. We want to make sure things don't happen again. And we are very opinionated. And then when we're in love, it's the opposite. So when we're in the energy of love, when we kind of elevate ourselves into that, it's a feeling of acceptance. It's the energy of acceptance. And that energy is always looking for the good. So in the example of with Jason, you were looking for the good. You saw, oh, this is
Right.
good. Oh, this is good. Oh, this is good. And you start seeing all these great, amazing qualities about him. And your energy in that moment can't possibly be looking for the bad and looking for the good at the same time. So you really can't entertain those two different energies. You're either in the state of love or you're in the state of fear. And so in this energy, you're transcending any differences. Even if you have differences, they're not a big deal.
Right, because you're putting your focus on all these good things. That's
Right.
really interesting.
Yeah. And then so it's very much about feeling all of these things that are happening creates this feeling of love inside of you. So it's felt inside of you. It's your feeling, right?
Yeah.
It's not a feeling that's outside of you or dependent on things outside of you. Those things outside of you triggered the thing inside of you.
Right.
And that's the very first distinction that we must make in order to have the rest of this conversation. Because if we keep buying into the belief or the illusion that being in love has to do with the other person outside of us, then we're going to go down just this whole other path where we blame everything on things outside of us instead of taking ownership where we are in, what state of being that we're in each moment as we travel through time in our relationship. And so that's one of the biggest things. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I think especially thinking about all the like your anger or your fear or anxiety and all these other feelings that we do try to control, we tend to think of love as something that happens to us instead of something that we could also control. I really like that, looking at it as something that you can take more ownership of instead of just like having it happen to you.
Right. Yes, because in that state we're dependent. So,
Right.
and that's where we enter into these codependent states of being where we need our partner to do or say certain things in order for us to feel loved. But
that is-
see,
yes.
yeah, it's like what is really happening is that love is just always inside of us, and we can actually tap into it whenever we want to. And whether or not something outside of us triggers us to tap into it can help, but it's not ever their responsibility or because of them or their, responsibility. That's in our domain, whether or not we're
Right.
in love or in fear.
Wow, that's awesome.
Yeah.
I just think that's so empowering to look at it that way. Because then when you're in a relationship, you have so much control over your own feelings. I love that.
Yes, yes. A lot of what I talk about often is about being aware of what's in your domain and what's not in your domain. So it's very similar to, I think it's the Lord's Prayer that says, grant me the wisdom to know what I can change and what I can't. Do you know what I'm talking
It
about?
sounds familiar.
Yeah.
Yes. Yes, I have heard that.
Yes. And it's really, this is what it is. This is in your control. This
Right.
is what you have the ability to change or manipulate. It's your emotional reactions or your emotional state of being, whether that's in protection mode, in fear, in anger, in sadness, or in love. These are the things that are in our control. The second thing that adds so much to that perception of whether something will trigger us into that state of love, all depends on our early conditioning. So if we were, as a child or in early relationships, we might look at the same exact thing and perceive it differently. So one of us might, for example, look at coffee and find that, oh, that looks delicious, I want some. And the other person might say, like, oh, get that away from me, it's all about perception. So perception is also within our own domain, how we, what we look at, and then the meaning that we make from what we're looking at. So owning the perception and the meaning will help to understand how either this or this or this triggers us to fall into love.
Right. And I can definitely see that happening in my relationship where sometimes my husband will do something very neutral, but because of my upbringing or my own perception, I'm looking at it as like a slight against me or something that makes me upset. But if I could change that to kind of take a step back and be like, why do I think that? Wait, no, I have control over how I perceive that action. I don't have to get upset over that.
And the meaning that I make about
Right.
it too.
Exactly.
Right? So we were talking about this earlier, is how we both have situations sometimes where our husbands come home from work and they're
Right.
so tired.
Right.
And they need to go take a nap, before they can help take over and help us co-parent as the amazing husbands that they are. And it's like, if I were to look at that and take it personally and say, they're not contributing right now,
Right.
then I'm going to feel slighted. And I also have another meaning that I could make of it. I could also have a meaning that says, oh, well, look how hard my husband is working.
Right.
And I appreciate them for that. And I want to support them and to get their sleep.
And I want him to be able to fill his own cup and recharge so that he has more to give us later too, and feels better about himself. And don't I love him enough to want to give him that gift too? So
Right.
yeah, that's a totally different way of
Yes.
looking at it.
And so when we can understand that this is happening all the time, another great example is the love languages, right? I think we talked about this one time. But anyway, it's like there's that book by Gary Chapman
Right.
about the 5 love languages. And each of us are sort of wired to receive and feel love in a different way. And he outlined 5 different ways. I kind of like to add on to that a little bit, but at the core, it's pretty well ironed out.
Right.
And, so the different ways that people like to receive love are either, gifts or acts of service, quality time, physical touch, and there's a few others. And that is an example of how we are perceiving that in love feeling, that trigger from different things.
Yeah.
So we need to take responsibility of that, of our perception and of the meaning we make, because we can even transcend needing those 5 love languages if we can understand that.
Right.
Because my partner might be doing an act of service, and that might not be my love language.
That sounds very familiar.
But I can choose to perceive it as an act of love, and I could change how that resides in me. And see, the only reason that might not be my love language is because of my earlier conditioning. And the only reason that maybe physical touch is my love language is also because of my early conditioning. And also, I think our personalities play a little bit in it as well.
Yeah.
But everything is about perception, the meaning we make,
Right.
and then this feeling that comes up inside of us and is only ours. And it doesn't have to do with the other person. So these things create the triggers, and then it triggers our emotional reaction.
Right.
And when we feel in love, that emotional reaction is that feeling of looking for the good, of seeing the good, of having each other's back, of transcending any differences, and that just overall feeling of acceptance.
So do you think that the more you step back and train yourself to look at, for example, if I were getting an act of service that typically is not the way that I receive love, but I've been trying to continuously tell myself, oh no, this is what he's done for me, and he did it because he loves me, and step back and recognize that and allow myself to feel loved by that act of service. Do you think the more that you do that, that just kind of becomes natural, and then you sort of change the way that you feel love more naturally without having to take that step back?
Absolutely. I mean, the more that you can make all the love languages your love language, the better off you are going to be. And your relationship.
More opportunities to feel love.
Right. Yeah, because it's going to trigger you into that state.
Yeah.
So the more that you can create your radar to see the good, essentially, is what it is. It's that quality of seeing the good. And when we do that, then it cultivates more and more of that feeling. And it's just like, gratitude practices. We always hear, have a daily gratitude practice. It's the same thing. The more that we cultivate our state of gratitude for things that we see in our world, the better off that we internally are going to be. So let's talk a little bit more about that when we come after the break. And we'll talk about how that applies to holding that state of living in love for the length of our relationship. This is Thriving Relationships, and we'll be right back.
The truth is, if you've lost intimacy, you can rebuild it. If there's too much pain, you can heal it. You don't have to break up your family when it gets hard. Learn the 6 essential elements to create a successful relationship. The legendary love program has been healing relationships from the brink of divorce all over Santa Clarita. Learn more at jessicahartley.com/program.
Welcome back to Thriving Relationships. This is Jessica Hartley and Amanda Gish, and we are talking all about falling out or living in love. The more that we can enter into this state of letting the world around us almost anything that my partner does trigger me into this state of love, the better off I'm going to be. The better off our relationship is going to be, the better off our children are going to be, the better off my work day is going to be, and therefore the clients that I see. And it just ripples this effect out into the world.
And I think likewise, if you're doing the opposite and looking at everything your partner does as a slight against you, you're really just harming yourself and your children and your family and all, and your life. It's just making your life so much harder. So it's interesting that you could really have either side of that coin.
Yeah, and that is in our domain. That stuff is in our control, because the world will always be our stimulus. And what we do with that stimulus is in our control. So this is why I always say that the relationship is the biggest opportunity for personal growth and development than any other place, and why it's so crucial, because it affects almost every other area of our lives and so many people around us, even ones that are not related to my immediate relationship. When your relationship is good, you're better at what you do at work.
Right.
And then when they have good experience with you, they're going to be feeling better in their home, and etc. We have such an effect on people, and a lot of it is just unknown. And it's like, if you walk, so in that moment, you have either the opportunity to either face that growth,
right,
or run away from it, or fight it.
And then you're really throwing away such an opportunity for personal growth.
Yeah.
If you decide to not stick it out and figure out what you can personally do to grow within that relationship or change the way that you're looking at it, it probably will catch up with you again in a future relationship, right?
Yes. And that's the thing too, we don't realize, is that, when we have an opportunity, a challenge and an opportunity to grow, we have a couple of different choices of reacting. We could fight, flight, or freeze, right? So it always triggers us into our fight or flight response. Or we could face it and use it for growth. But if we fight, flight, or freeze, and let's say we flight and we run away, or we break up with the person because we didn't feel loved or whatever it was, and we're blaming that feeling of love on them rather than it being our responsibility. Right. The thing is that this lesson, this opportunity will come back to us at a later time.
Right. And if you're able to learn how to take ownership for your own feelings of love, then I imagine that any relationship you come to, you're bringing that with you.
Yes.
And so
absolutely.
That's really like a tool that you have in your life with all types of different relationships.
Yes, and these are essential lessons that we're meant to learn in our experience here as a human. And we are always about growth. All of nature, all of life is always about growth. You put a seed in the ground, it's going to grow. It's all about this personal evolution. And if we run away from these opportunities, or we even get angry at them and create more destruction because of our anger, we are not going to ever totally escape it. It will always come back to us, and maybe it's meant to come back to us at another time, because maybe I'm not equipped to be able to deal with it or to transcend it right now. Right. And maybe I need to do some other personal growth before I can face and learn from that lesson in a different way. But regardless, it will come back.
Right.
And, sometimes when we, leave our relationships, or we say, I'm fallen out of love with my partner, and so, we're going to get divorced or break up, that might be self-serving for a person in that time, and that's okay too. But the lessons that you are meant to learn, if you didn't learn from them, they will come back. And maybe the person will change, but the situation and the feeling will be the same.
Right, and you hear that over and over again. People who have the same types of relationships over and over again, or they're given the same feedback from their partner over and over again, or they have the same feedback about their partner. And I think that's interesting to think that a lot of it is just because they haven't faced what they need to and learned how to bring that like self-stability to a relationship
Yes,
first.
to take ownership
Yeah.
for, whoa, I have a lesson here.
Yeah.
You know, and in every conflict, no matter what our partner did, there's always an opportunity to take ownership for something that I did as well. I was actually talking to my high school class about this morning. So I teach a high school homeschool class
Right.
on communication. And one of the things that we were talking about is how the idea of blame came up. And we talked about whose fault is it? So when some wrongdoing happens, whose fault is it? And then we kind of said, oh, well, let's say this person did this wrong. We called him Gary. Okay, is it Gary's? Is it Gary's fault? And then we kind of said, yeah, it's Gary's fault. He shouldn't have done that. And then I said, well, what if Gary is homeless and needed to steal that piece of bread or needed to steal that thing, and in order to survive, is it still his fault? And then it's like, well, then it's, his parents for not giving him a good life. Okay, well, but what about the parents? And then you keep going, and the parents will want to
Right.
blame the government and everything. It's like, we cannot entertain this idea of blame. And the more that we try to pin what's happening negatively in our experience outside of us and blame that on other people, the world, the government, we'll just end up walking around bitter, judgmental, and eventually be lonely. And the truth is that fear, that energy of fear, creates protection, judgment, separation. And love, if we enter into that feeling of love, which is could sometimes mean forgiveness, then we entertain belonging, togetherness, connection. All of the things that we do actually want in our lives. So it's funny because unknowingly, we have an intention to create connection, but our actions are doing all of the things to create disconnection
Right.
in our world or in our relationships.
And I think that if you are approaching any relationship in a way that you're looking at who is wrong and who is right, you're always going to have that battle. There's always
Yes.
going to, because it's usually not that clear. You're both contributing different things to the relationship. You're both projecting different things to the relationship. So the more awareness you can have about that, I'm sure it makes it easier to look at things more empathetically and look at what you personally can do to fix the situation instead of that blame.
Right. That's right. One of the things that was so profound to me when early on when I was studying psychology, that just blew my mind, is that every single human being always thinks they're the one that's right.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And that really threw me into this other perspective of maybe trying to figure out who's right or wrong or trying to blame is useless.
Right, because everyone is the hero of their own story, of course.
Yeah, and we're all, like, even that guy, that character that we created, Gary, he's stealing because he thinks that's right. He needs to. He has self-preservation for him.
Right. I think that it's, unless there is an actual, something that's really wrong in someone's brain, like a pathological issue, which I guess that's another topic.
That's a whole other thing, yeah.
But I think, like, most cases, people are acting the way that they feel is best, and that they feel that they are, I think people think of themselves as a good person, that most people are genuinely trying their best in every situation,
Right.
whatever that means for them.
Yeah. Innately, we all have innocence. We're all doing the best that we know with what we have right now.
Right.
And we all want connection.
Right. And it could even be that Gary was never loved as a child, and and this is the way that he's acting out against the world, but he truly has a good heart. It's in there. He just doesn't know how to. So, yeah.
And so it could be Gary's fault. It could be everyone's fault. It could be no one's fault. Or you could stop blaming outside of you and just say, what could I do better?
There you go. Yes.
You know,
like,
what
doesn't
could
matter.
I do better?
Right.
Because then I can change my world because of and whenever I enter into a state of love, that energy will create a reaction in my immediate environment.
And I love applying that to, for example, my relationship, thinking about like the way that my husband shows love, if it's not always necessarily the way that I feel it, instead of blaming, this happened when he was a kid or this happened, instead of just looking at it as like, I can't change any of that. There's no need to blame anyone for that. What can I do now to feel love from this situation?
Yeah, and you got to be careful with those 5 love languages, because even though you might have yours and know what they are and know what your partners are, if you need your partner to show love in those ways so that you can feel loved, you're back in codependence.
There you go.
Which is even worse than knowing what the love languages are in the first place.
Right.
So what I teach is I use them as a tool, but I teach that only give them if they're only give those actions or words from a place of having a full cup of like owning your in love space, of being in that state of love, and then wanting to give without any strings attached. Because sometimes what we do in relationship is we give because we want to get something back in return, and that's just really manipulation.
Yeah.
When we are in relationship and we feel this feeling of falling out of love with someone, once again, we're not falling out of love with them, and they actually have little to do with it. It's more of, I personally dropped out of this state of being in love, and I've dropped into fear. And so when we are in a state of fear, we'll have certain behaviors that in the root of them are protecting us from getting hurt, protecting us from putting myself out there and not feeling love back.
Yes.
Right. And, but see, if we cut that tie and say, no, I don't get love from you. I get love from me. You might trigger it, and thank you when you do. But that doesn't even make sense once we start to entertain this idea, and so we take that understanding into the span of a long-term marriage. Now we're talking about, it's not my partner's responsibility to do A, B, C, or D in order for me to be happy or to feel in love with myself or them or anything. That is my responsibility. And what I choose to train myself to be triggered into that state, and the more that I can train myself to be triggered into that state of love, the better for everybody. Secondly, notice when I'm acting out of protection. We don't always know that we're in the energy of fear, but we could tell when we're being protective.
That's so interesting to hear you say it that way, because I think about like, I can remember feeling at times like, well, he hasn't given me a hug today, and that's how I want to feel loved. And so I'm just sitting here, well, I'm not going to hug him because he needs to hug me first, and I always hug him. And it's just, then you get into this cycle, and it absolutely is fear. It's that fear of like, well, I don't want to feel like I'm always,
giving and
not
in
receiving.
Return, yeah.
Whereas if I were to just go give a hug, it's like, oh, well, then I already feel loved, and I get to express it. And what's wrong with that?
Right. So the first checkpoint, and thank you for that example. The first checkpoint in that is, okay, I'm feeling dependent on my spouse or my partner for love.
Right.
Okay, I need to take ownership here and fill up my own love cup. Enter into that state of being myself, and don't need my partner to do anything, the hug or the kiss or whatever, to make me feel loved. Now, once I'm there, now I want a hug, so I'm going to go get one.
Right. Oh, I love that.
Yeah. And that's the difference. And and here's the other thing that happens when you're in this state of love. Just think about it. When you start entertaining this in your day-to-day way of being, your natural way of being, your partner is going to feel like he doesn't need to bend or shape himself to do anything in order to please you, right?
Right.
And that also creates in him the ability to be self-honoring as well, or if, whoever your partner is. And then it just creates, just like fear will create more and more destruction, and eventually you're staring exactly at what you're trying to protect yourself from.
Yes.
The same with love. So love creates more and more love reflecting back to you. And when you understand it this way, it's no longer just like a woo-woo spiritual concept. It actually makes sense. Oh, when I act this way, then my partner is not going to be offended, and then my partner is going to feel supported, even if they're feeling it from a dependent state. I'm still giving it, right? And so it's going to help trigger them into their state of being in love,
Right.
And then we create this beautiful mountain of connection and acceptance, and this is where our solidarity and all of the other things that we crave in a relationship and what is necessary to make it work comes from. It's from that being in that energy of love and taking ownership for it, and not blaming it on our partners.
I love that.
Okay, so we're going to go ahead and take our second break. And when we come back, I'm going to talk about a few different steps, tools that we can do to help get ourselves into love in the moment. Thriving Relationships, we'll be right back.
When you feel like you're at the end of your rope, tie a knot and hold on, because a quality relationship will bring the most meaning to your life. No matter how hard it feels right now, this is your opportunity to grow every part of who you are and bring the best of what you've got to the table. No one wants to spend their life alone. Make this one count. It takes effort and dedication, but you're capable. Visit jessicahartley.com/program.
98.1 FM and AM 1220.
Welcome back to Thriving Relationships with Jessica Hartley. So Amanda Gish and I have been discussing all about this feeling of being in love and what it really is, and what falling out of love really is, and how we can make such the biggest impact in our relationships, in our lives, and in our worlds by taking ownership of these emotional reactions. And any kind of distrust, any kind of blame, any kind of creating separation, either emotionally or physically.
Or I wonder if part of that is also like nitpicking or finding things that you feel are like slights against you, even though...
Right, so feeling, what is the word, is taking things
defensive.
personally.
Yeah, or
and getting defensive. Yes, then you're not in that state of love. So when you notice that you're not in that state, the very first thing to do is always to remove yourself from the stimulus, so that you can gain your composure and then go back to it. Okay, so it's not about running away from it and ignoring it or trying to run away from the conflict or the confrontation, but actually just creating a space so you can get grounded and then go get it again.
Yeah, so you're not in such a reactive place.
Yes. So when you do that, you can take some space, and then, it could be as simple as a meditation. As mantras are really great. So physically, when we're in fear, we usually close our hearts, and when we're in love, we feel our hearts are open. So one of the things that I did early on to train myself to be in this state more often was when I would feel myself taking something personally or getting angry about something that my spouse did, I would take space and I would just mantra to myself, say over and over, I'm keeping my heart open. I'm keeping my heart open. My heart is open. I'm keeping my heart open. And all the while, my brain is still telling me why I'm upset.
Right.
But I'm kind of going past that and just powering through with this mantra until I could actually feel my heart open. you know. That's a really great way to do it. Also, breathing
Yes.
is important. So taking some good grounding breaths. And that's why meditation can come in handy there, because it's all about grounding in our breath. Prayer, if that's something that you like to do. Prayer is also another form of connecting to your source. And, letting go. Here's the thing that you don't want to do. You don't want to judge your fear or your protection, because then you're adding to it, because judgment is fear. So sometimes we'll say like, oh my gosh, I entered into a state of fear and I'm trying to protect myself. And then I start to judge myself because of it. And that won't help at all. So it's very important not to judge the judgment or judge the fear or judge the distrust or judge any of that. Be understanding.
Right.
Oh, I understand that I am in this state right now. It came from my conditioning. Okay, fine. And now I'm taking responsibility of it.
So it's just more of a noticing without judgment.
Yes.
I think similar like when you meditate and you're noticing your thoughts
Yes.
and letting them go.
Yes.
Just like taking inventory of what's going on in your body and your mind, and then letting it go.
Yes, yes. And that is very different from, you're allowing it to exist.
Right.
And by allowing it to exist, you set it free.
Right.
By judging it, you keep it tethered to you.
Right.
Because you have a feeling associated with it. And whether that feeling is love or fear, it's associated. So it's going to stay as a trigger.
I was just going to say it could potentially then trigger other thoughts and feelings, and then you're really pushing yourself farther from that space of feeling love.
Right. And so when we judge, we're reinforcing negative triggers.
Yeah.
So we want to just accept that feeling, that emotion, and then just let it exist, and then choose to focus on where you want to focus. So then to say, okay, that exists. Now I'm going to keep my heart open. Here's the other thing that really helps me when I'm in that state as well, is remembering that based on just experience through life and universal truths, the more that I am grounded in my peace and in my own happiness and in the state of love, my world reflects that back to me.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So I can trust, because sometimes that feeling of distrust, it can be so strong that it just does not allow us to go into that state of love. And what we can trust in then is that when I'm in the state of love, my world will reflect that back to me. And that is all that I can trust. So I can trust my path in life. I can trust that things will come up for my growth and that they are here to serve me. I can trust that the more that I am in my state of love, and as opposed to in the state of protection or fear, the better off my world is and my relationship, everything.
Yeah.
And so that also really helped me in the past, where I had to sort of jump this bridge, holding on to some distrust of something, and let go of it and say, all right, I give it to God, or I give it to the universe. And now I am just going to know that when I'm in this state, it will create this and reflect it back to me.
Right. I love the way, because I've heard that before, that that a lot of our choices or the way we look at the world are either based in fear or love, and I never fully understood that. But hearing you explain it, especially the way that like it affects you physically, and it affects the way that you look at your partner and the choices they make and the choices that you make, like the way that you explain it makes it very clear for me to understand what that means. And I really like that. I think it's so true. And the heart open and closed, because there's literally changes in your body when you feel fear. And looking at some of like my more reactive moments in my own relationship, I can see that they're absolutely based in fear, which I never would have been able to draw that connection before without seeing it that way. So that's
Right.
interesting.
Yes. And so just being able to take ownership for that. And hey, you know what? We're all human. We're all like, if we don't call ourselves forward to this awareness, we will naturally operate
Right.
in those ways of moving into fight or flight. It's like our amygdala in our brain will take over and trigger that fight or flight response if we don't get conscious about what's going on and take the reins.
Right.
And that's what, teachers and mentors mean when they say, lead your life by your heart, not your mind. Because the mind, if it's in charge, it's going to steer you through fight or flight.
It wants to
rather
protect
than
you. Yeah.
rather than living in your heart.
Yes.
And being in that state of love.
That's beautiful.
Yes. If there's any trouble in your relationship, if you might be facing divorce, if you want to be proactive and make sure that you're on the right track, please reach out to me and we can have a long talk about what's going on and where you want to be, and I can help get you there as efficiently as possible. My number again is 661-347-8473, and we will see you next time. Bye for now.